Hello, I'm Duncan from Intel. I joined there about 6 months ago, and we've set up a new institute in London with University College London and Imperial College, looking at sustainable connected cities. Now, we're actually a mix of scientists, engineers, and anthropologists. There's about 20 of us at the moment. And I guess the basic brief that we've got is to try and explore how technology can enhance the socio-economic well-being of cities. Now, in terms of the kind of things that Intel are interested in, Intel obviously make computer chips, but they're actually interested in the ecosystems around how those chips and those devices are being used. So, you know, we do have this kind of concept of cities as a platform, and platform is a very loaded word, and I'll just let you interpret that how you want to, and we can have conversations afterwards about that. But this is kind of something that actually underpins a lot of the work from the Intel side that we're interested in exploring. Now, Intel have been working for years, decades if you like, within things like the area of embedded computing or intelligent systems. So these are little chips being used in devices. I guess the movement that we're seeing at the moment is towards this idea of the cyber-physical systems, which is in effect is when those devices start to become connected, and there's also the human enters into the situation of those devices being used. And so we're interested in these ideas of manageability. You know, once you put all these billions, so there's 50 billion devices that people talk about going out into our world. Wow, how do you kind of manage those? How do you change the batteries? How do you update the operating system on those, over the next 50 or so years? Also interested in this idea of reliability. Intel have put kit up into the Mars rover. It's running Wind River Linux. And that's got to run for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. How do you anyone who's used any computing devices or owns a laptop, you're probably onto your nth version of that already. You know, how do you design those things to work reliably without being touched? And then trustworthy of information. How do you, we heard in the previous session about data becoming a material that we can start to work with. How do you trust the sources of that? It's this whole notion of actually, it's not just the measurements, but you're also wanting to understand where that's coming from. And then the last issue for us is around this idea of interoperability, which I'll come back to. So I've got two projects that I want to very quickly go through, and they kind of do touch on some of the comments this morning within the session around data. For us, they fit within this enabling connected communities stream, and they're about how people can actually make data or make use of data. So one of the projects is called it's actually called Distance, and it's all about creating an internet of school things. It's government funded, so it has to have the Internet of Things in the title. But that project was born out of some work that I did about 5 years ago, where we were doing some work with a bunch of schools for the Department of Education in looking how you could improve or change the quality of science, the science education environment in schools to encourage key stage 3 and 4, so secondary school kids, to get more engaged in the STEM subjects. And that was a fantastic project in the sense that it really kind of opened my eyes as to kind of what these kids were doing and how science was being taught in schools. And you have this scenario where the kids were using these quite clunky data loggers, because using a data logger as part of the curriculum, kids have to learn how to use them to capture data. And they would spend 50 minutes of the 1 hour lesson basically getting this kit set up and working, so that at the end of the lesson, the teacher went, fantastic, we've now got some data coming out. They didn't think what the data was or what it was used for, or even if it was the right data. They just had data coming out. And just that connectivity just kind of seemed backwards. So how can they... and then at about the same time, a Nesta report came out, which was commenting on how much high tech in school gets left in the cupboard. And again, that kind of it reflected the observations that we were making going into these schools and seeing how stuff was being used. We set up a fantastic robot lab for the kids to use, but they were only allowed to use it at a certain part of the week with a teacher there, and all the kit was locked away. So if you think of that versus kind of the maker or hacker labs that we're seeing emerging, completely different environments. So one of the things that we're working on is this idea, this is kind of the Internet of Things project, if you like. But if you take this idea that within schools we've got whole different kinds of ways in which we can sense the environment. And this could be computational devices, but it could also be the school kids recording the day of the year that the tree blossoms in front of reception. Yeah? And you have to bear in mind that these schools are they're working on cycles of sort of 50, 60 years, or they're interested in thinking of things in those time frames. Then in the middle, you've got this idea of the information hub, which is where this data is stored. And then you've got up at the top right here, these different kind of forms of actuation, which could be a dashboard to allow you to discover data that's available. But it's also very practical things like lesson plans that teachers can actually use the stuff in a meaningful way. But to me, the heart of this project, we've got challenges in getting each of the 7 partners working together to try and deliver this. But we've also got 8 schools that we're deploying this in. We're trying to get those 8 schools to interoperate in some way, to share and use each other's data. But then this little simple arrow down here at the bottom right saying general interoperability is we have to also connect to another 8 different projects that are happening around the UK, nothing to do with schools, but are providing data and sharing it. And it's this idea of interoperating. How can you set up the ecosystems to allow these different networks of sensing devices to be able to work together in some way, to me, is really interesting. And the key things that come out of this is how do you discover that data, but also how do you make that data become a material that teachers and kids can work with, as in removing the geek from the loop. The second project is, and this is just a kind of a quick one if you like, is we're doing a project around putting weather stations and agri-sensors into allotments and community gardens around the London area. And this is from the product guys who are basically building these platforms, wanting to get proof of concepts out there so that they can then go and sell these devices to people like tomato farmers in China who want to buy 3 million of these devices. Now, that's kind of interesting, but it's an industrial system. They're just doing an industrial monitoring system at kind of quite a large scale. Unfortunately, that's where the money is. So this is kind of the scale issue that we've got. What I find much more interesting is how do I get allotment owners or community gardens using the same kind of geeky infrastructure? Now, the house that I live in at the moment backs onto an allotment, and lots of my neighbours are all allotment owners. And the last thing they want is sensing equipment to go out into their allotment to help them run their allotment better, because it's a hobby. However, when you get chatting to them, they are interested about being able to increase the yield of their asparagus. They don't say it in those ways, but they are reading up about how to do stuff better. They are looking at how to maintain the soil better, what nutrients to put into it. They are continually learning and trying to improve their processes. So to me, there's this really interesting system. And this kind of, and I'm observing this in more and more things that we look at from the community perspective. In what way can we put that technology into the hands of those people in a way that's actually meaningful to them? And that's there's actually kind of a real interesting challenge there in terms of what those interfaces are, and also how you then create the data literacy around those materials, and how you socialize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.